One of the good things about a conference is the ability to network, but we do have a program. My name is Richard Reed. I'm Dean of the Monteahuja College of Business at Cleveland State University, and I am pleased to welcome you to this 2016 Real Estate Conference. I wanted to take a moment to thank each of our speakers and panelists for coming today and for volunteering their time and energy. They're the ones that are going to provide the content in today's conference. I'd also like to thank the committee that has put this together. I was just explaining to one of our speakers that the organization of this has occurred with absolutely no input from me. The committee of about 10 people has worked enormously hard to organize the conference, especially Linda Kane. She's our newest executive in residence, and she has worked tirelessly to put this conference on. So please give Linda a hand. Also, today's program would not have been possible without our sponsors. A very special thank you to each sponsor for providing the gifts for the program and the scholarships for our students. That is really appreciated. A very generous gift was made to the College of Business, specifically to the Finance Department, for the establishment of the Paul J. Everson Real Estate Center. In honor of the benefactor and co-creator of the center, I would like to welcome David Browning to say a few words about Mr. Paul Everson and the late Dr. Webb, who was a professor and former chair of the Finance Department and co-founder of the Everson Real Estate Center.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here with you today and part of this program. And in particular, unfortunately, Paul Everson could not be with us here today, but he's someone who is near and dear to me, a real mentor in my career. For more than 40 years, the name Paul Everson has been synonymous with real estate in Northeast Ohio. The retired president and namesake of Paul J. Everson & Associates has worked diligently to advance the business of real estate as a broker, agent, developer, and educator. Mr. Everson has served as president of the United Multiple Listing Service, the Cleveland Area Board of Realtors, the Ohio Association of Realtors, the Northeast Ohio Apartment Association, and most importantly, the Ohio Real Estate Commission. Mr. Everson has been a director and trustee of the Real Estate Political Education Committee, the National Association of Realtors, and the Ohio Real Estate Commission, in recognition for his high achievements in leadership and service roles in the industry. Mr. Everson received the Realtor of the Year Award from KBOR, the Distinguished Service Award from NAR, and for his sustained contribution to the real estate profession, he received an Honorary Doctor of Business Administration degree from Cleveland State in 2008. Now, my personal observation about Paul is based on my 30 years in the real estate industry and having served with him in various trade and community organizations. Paul is the consummate professional. He's knowledgeable, likable, and respected. Most importantly, he's passionate about serving clients and what's best for our industry. His generous support for the real estate education began in 1992 when he established the Paul J. Everson Scholarship Fund. In 2008, the Paul Everson Real Estate Center and the Paul J. Everson Distinguished Professorship was established through additional gifts from Mr. Everson. At the time of establishing the endowment, Mr. Everson said, "This endowment maintains the real estate program at Cleveland State forever and makes the Center for Real Estate more unified. Mr. Everson foresees that his donation will have a lasting effect on real estate professionals in the community, allowing them to take their careers up a level and into the investment grade." So we humbly express our gratitude for Paul today for his support, his expertise, and his vision, and we look forward to continuing his legacy going forward. Now, in addition to Paul, we also want to honor Dr. Jim Webb. And Jim was founder of the Real Estate Research Center, well-known researcher and highly regarded instructor. Although he passed away in 2009, those of us in the industry still remember him fondly. It was his friendship, his expertise, and his ability to connect his students into the industry that made a difference for his students and made a difference for me. Because running a real estate company here in Cleveland, I have several professionals that have worked with me for years, and I met them through Jim Webb. So, again, want to welcome you and want to recognize and honor Paul Everson and Jim Webb. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I would like to also recognize Mrs. Webb, who's over here. She's joining us for the conference. It's now my pleasure to introduce our Master of Ceremonies and Director of the Everson Center to kick off the conference. Please welcome Paul All. Paul, do you want to stand up? Thank you. Paul is a senior studying finance and international business. He is one of our highly regarded student leaders on campus and has plans to pursue a career in finance. He's going to be your Master of Ceremonies through the program. I would also like to introduce the director of the center, Haigang, Dr. Haigang Zhao. Where's Haigang? He's at the back. He's a professor in finance and, as I say, chair of the finance department, and he kindly agreed to be the director of the center. I think it was about a year ago, maybe a little bit more. At this point, we're going to do presentations of scholarships before we get into the main program. So if Paul and Haigang can join me up here, this would be good.
Hello, everyone. Cleveland and Cleveland State University have undergone some amazing changes in the past few years that I've been here. Behind Rhodes Tower, we have a new engineering building being built. In front of the colleges of business and urban affairs, new residence halls are being constructed. The Center for Innovation and Medical Professions building was dedicated just last year. As students, we are grateful for this opportunity and thankful to Mr. Everson and each of today's sponsors. Dr. Zhao?
So I'm going to read the names of the company that has sponsored the scholarship as well as the recipients of the scholarship recipients. When I read the name, the recipient, please come on stage. As I always told you, also take a picture here with the dean. Sponsored by Forest City, Dimitri Alesiko. Sponsored by DDR. Sorry, we'll wait. Sponsored by DDR Tiffany Biaco. Sponsored by Akron and the Cleveland Association of Realtors, Lance Davidson. Sponsored by the Paul Everson Real Estate Center, Patrick Gibbons. Oh, sorry, not here. So we keep the certificate and the scholarship for him to pick up later. Again, sponsored by the Paul Everson Real Estate Center, Jeremy Kazak. Sam Lister. Okay, we'll move. Sponsored by Village Capital, Tara Megan. Sponsored by BDO, Sarah Metals. Sponsored by the Paul Everson Real Estate Center, Caitlin McManus. Sponsored by CBRE, Romeo Metric. Sponsored by Seagull Genies, Dash Patel. Scholarship sponsored by Urban Land Institute, Nikuma Patel. And also we have a scholarship sponsored by Paul Everson Real Estate Center, Clinton Weber. Scholarship sponsored by Global X, Clay Zugazugi. Last but not the least, scholarship sponsored by Cohen & Company, Paul All.
Thank you, Dr. Zhao. It's an honor to be an Everson Scholar. I would now like to welcome Dr. Spencer Robertson to say a few words and introduce our first speaker. Dr. Robertson is a former Everson Scholar, Cleveland State University alumnus, and former student and one of the founders of the Paul J. Everson Real Estate Center, Dr. Webb. He is a director of real estate at Central Michigan University, on the board of directors and chair of the research committee for the American Real Estate Society, and co-editor of the Journal of Sustainable Real Estate. Spencer Robertson.
Good afternoon. Oh, look at that, we got a lively crowd. All right. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce Dr. Michael Seiler. Dr. Seiler is the K. Dane Brookshire Endowed Chair and Professor of Real Estate and Finance at the College of William & Mary. He is a highly sought-after industry expert, past president of the American Real Estate Society, and a former student of Jim Webb, one of the founders of this organization. As an editor of our premier academic journal, the Journal of Real Estate Research, Mike, is not only a trailblazer creating new knowledge about how we understand and conceive of real estate, but he is now a gatekeeper and a thought leader, helping determine what new information most advances our knowledge about the industry. But honestly, none of these are the reason it's really, truly my honor to introduce Mike. It's because in addition to his many accomplishments, Mike is a man, a Viking, an alumni, who epitomizes graciousness, service, and giving back. On top of the significant service he provides to industry and to academic bodies, he acts as a mentor to countless new academics, a proud father, and a friend to more people than I can count. Like his mentor, Jim Webb, many in the field owe their success to Mike. So please, let's give a warm Viking welcome for Dr. Michael Seiler.
Is my PowerPoint up here, Spence? Just going to load my PowerPoint slides here. Are they already in the folder? Okay. Hello, everyone. Is this working? Can you hear me? Okay. So first, let me tell you what a great honor it is to be here today. It's been quite a while since I've been here. I graduated in '97. I came back about 9.5 years ago, and therefore, if you do the math, every 9.5 years I come, so I guess I'll see you in another 9.5. There are a lot of changes, not just changes to this building, which as I walked up, I thought, wait a minute, I thought the Student Center was right here. It looks totally different. And then I turned around to get my bearings. I was looking for Rascal House. Not there either. I thought, wow, this is going to be a tough trip for me. So a lot of great changes in Cleveland. Also, obviously, the Cavs have won a championship. That was something they told me would not happen in my lifetime. So I knew if I lived long enough or prayed hard enough, we could make that happen. So congratulations to Cleveland. All of the changes I've seen around campus are fantastic. So everything that you're doing is working extremely well. When I walk in here, I see the pride. It's a totally different environment than it was even 20 years ago, which was great. It's even greater now. I also want to thank you folks for inviting me here today. I want to dedicate this presentation to my mentor, James R. Webb. Jim has not been with us for the last 7 years, but I always know how long it's been because my son, Evan James Seiler, is named, his middle name is after Jim Webb. So just something that we did to honor him. He was more than just a professor of mine, more than just a friend, more than just a mentor. So that's a thing that we had done in our family to honor him. So I'd like to dedicate this presentation to Jim and also to Anise and their entire family. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to share with you a presentation that I will be making in New York next month to a company you might have heard, a small company called Blackstone. And in academics, we have something called the job market paper. It's what you do when you're trying to look for a job. So I'm not leaving academics, but I was working on a series of papers that relate to a concept called strategic mortgage default. That means house prices have gone down so much that you find that it might be in your best interest to walk away from your mortgage. It's a very hot topic. It's one that is fraught with a lot of debate on each side. So I'm not here to have that debate today. That would be about a 20-hour seminar that we would have. But what I will do is I'll share with you a piece of research that is part of a much greater puzzle, if you will, to talk about what firms can do to collect on some of this bad debt that is out there. It's a massive space. If you have not seen or heard about this, there are auto loans are following kind of the subprime market crisis, and credit card debt's always been there. Maybe student loans will follow. So what I'm going to talk about today specifically relates to mortgage debt. However, it can very easily be applied, I would think, to a lot of other different spaces. So I'll test the market in another month and see what the folks on Wall Street think about this idea. As I go through, I'm very happy if you ask questions. You can also wait till the end. We have an entire hour. I don't think that I'll need that much. I'm certainly going to spare you all the boring formulas, and I'll kind of explain the theories in a very easy to absorb way. I'm not going to show you the math and all that crazy stuff. But hopefully I'll tell a compelling story that will grab your interest as we go through. So this is the College of Business here at College of William & Mary. And I've been there this is my 4th year now. When I graduated here, I went to Hawaii Pacific University for 11 years, where I served and did all the things you might hope that a person would do when they lived in Hawaii. Then I went to Old Dominion University for 5 years. In that time, the research that I was doing, I was very fortunate to get it looked at by the Wall Street Journal, LA Times, the Post, all the major outlets. And one day I got a phone call, and I didn't know the person on the other line. They said, why are you publishing all of this stuff in academic journals? Effectively, why are you giving all of this information away? And I said, well, what would you propose that I do with it? And they said, well, come work for us. And it was a hedge fund, Palix Capital, and I said, well, I don't want to quit my academic job, but I will make trips to New York and sit with investors and so forth. And I have to tell you, as an academic, it's an amazing experience. So the research that we do, too often we think, oh, who's going to care about it, who's going to read it? This is an example, and many of the faculty here at Cleveland State are doing research that industry does care about. And so again, I've chosen a paper today that I hope will spark your interest. You may or may not be in this particular investment space, but either way, I think it does apply to all of us, because almost everyone in here is a homeowner. And if you're not yet, you certainly will be. So without further ado, I know there's some fancy words in here, but I kind of want to give you a sense of what I do. So under Jim Webb, everyone's talked about how great he is. I can't possibly overstate that. But one of the things that he encouraged me and all of the other doctoral students to do is to think in a different way than everyone else, not to do the same old thing over and over again. We don't need the 1,000th study on the same topic. Better to do an original study on a new topic. And so, again, this is what I do. So I do something called behavioral and experimental real estate. And after explaining that, people's first question is, I don't know what you're talking about. What does that mean? What is behavioral? What is experimental real estate? And so very simply, I'll pick on academics here. I ask folks who are professors, I say, how many of you are earning the most money you can possibly earn by teaching in a classroom? Of course, nobody raises their hand, right? Because we all feel like we're underpaid and so forth. Maybe we're not. But the point is that we care way more about our utility, if you will. We care about a lot more things than just money. So what are the things we care about? Well, we care about where we fit into a social network. We care about family. We care about the ability to do whatever research we think is interesting, not just what someone tells us to do. So we care about all these things. So this is simply an expansion. Instead of saying that when you maximize your utility or your overall satisfaction, instead of just saying it that way, most people would say, well, I don't really know how to measure all those things. Can we just say we're trying to maximize wealth? And that keeps the math really, really simple. Okay. I don't worry about the simple math. I operate in that fuzzy part between utility and wealth maximization. So I'm going to have a presentation today about that fuzzy thing that we really have a difficult time wrapping our mind around. The other thing is it a test of rationality? And the answer is no. Here's the analogy that I like to use. If you've ever gone to a magic show, okay, they're not really magic. Nothing magic is happening. These are illusionists, and what they do is they identify blind spots in our brain, little pitfalls, things that we just kind of gloss right over in our day-to-day life. So by way of analogy, when all of you came into this building today, you didn't have to think about putting your left foot in front of your right foot. You didn't have to think about driving. I'm sure when you drive here or when you drive home tonight, your mind might drift and you might wonder, wow, how did I get home already? I don't remember making all those turns. Okay, so a lot of the things we do is on a subconscious level. Your brain is operating, it does know what's going on, but you don't have to cognitively think about those things. So somewhere in that subconscious space is where 99.9% of the time our brain does us a huge favor by not bothering our consciousness. But the other time, sometimes it can trip us up. And so people over, whether you're a magician or whether you're a behavioralist like myself, you try to identify these tiny little pieces and how they might be used, hopefully, to our advantage to avoid these pitfalls. So that's a lot of what my job is, trying to identify these things. And others before me, sometimes I just grab a theory here and there, as I've done today. Primary data collection, I'm going to do an experiment. Okay, what I'm presenting to you today is the result of an experiment. And if you're a scientist, you say, well, I know what an experiment is, right? Here's the temperature, here's the humidity, I've set this, and therefore, A causes B. So it's a very widely accepted discipline or methodology, if you will. But in the expert testimony that I've done when I do expert witness work for eminent domain, you can't use the word experiment because it sounds like it's not a real thing, like, I don't know, I just tried something, I tried an experiment. Okay, so that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a methodology that's been out there, and it's the reason why we have cures for diseases and so forth. But it's applied to a social science, and not many folks are doing that. So again, trying to do something different with a great tool that already exists, applying it to a new situation. So what fields can we possibly grab from? What does this apply to? Well, my degree here is in finance, and I studied real estate. Also psychology and marketing, because a lot of these tricks, if you will, these parlor tricks, if you want to have fun with it, they basically relate to those holes in our psychic makeup. Epidemiology, the study of outbreak of disease. I've got papers on all of these things. I won't go through the list. But neuroscience or neurology is an area that I've got about 5 papers in. We're actually studying the brain as people are considering these strategic mortgage default decisions. We also have done some genetic testing of it to see if there may be predispositions to behave in a certain way under a certain situation. So a lot of really, really fun science is going out there. I'm not going to discuss all those today, but what I will do is hit a couple of the technologies that we're using. So if debt collection is not your space, maybe you are a REIT investor. Maybe you have that as part of a portfolio. Maybe you are a REIT yourself. One of the things that we've done is we've taken the quarterly conference calls of CEOs and CFOs and analyzed not just what they said during the Q&A session of a quarterly conference call, but look for what they did not say. And you're like, well, what does that mean? So when everyone speaks, they have pauses and intonations in their voice. They have hesitancies and so forth. So we get a baseline for something that maybe they'll read a disclosure. And then after being asked questions, we see how they answer the questions, not what they say. Anyone can listen to what you say. But we have a very, very complicated algorithm to try to infer what is behind that voice. And so that's layered voice analysis. Pretty cool stuff. Again, talked about the DNA stuff. We track people's eyes and their sweat as they go through some of these experiments. So there's really no end to what we have done, and certainly I look forward to other technologies that will come along. But really fun stuff. It's out there at times, but it's great. Popular media loves it, and therefore our dean loves it a lot. I'll blow through these. These are a couple of examples, too small to look at. Here's someone getting inside a Siemens 3.0 fMRI machine. So it just measures blood flow in your brain. Pretty cool stuff. Okay, let me get to the current study. And again, as we go through, if you have any questions, jump right in. So historically speaking, if we look at people's payment of their mortgage, this is so residential, people's payment of their mortgage. Historically speaking, the default rate is under 1%. So if there's any way you can afford to pay your mortgage, and I mean any way, you'll take on a second job. If you're married, maybe that extra spouse will work, extra hours or whatever. You may sell off assets to do it. You may borrow money from family. We just have not seen historically people default on a mortgage unless they absolutely had to. So this term of strategic mortgage default really didn't exist until the housing crisis of 2006, 2008, whatever marker you want to put on it. However, after that time, home values fell so far and people believed that they would continue to fall, that they looked at an asset where they were significantly underwater, and they asked themselves, why am I still paying the mortgage on this? It's cheaper for me to find a similar asset where I can go out and rent, so I'm more positive on the cash flow if I don't do this, and I'm already in the hole on the initial investment, my down payment, so there's no reason for me to do it. It would take me hours and hours and hours to tell you all the pros and cons and the reasons why people would do this. It goes far beyond financial. I've got tons of papers on this stuff, but basically I'm going to push past why people strategically default and just talk about what happens once they have already defaulted, and then they are left with what's called a judgment or a deficiency judgment. Deficiency, of course, implying that there's not enough there when they sold the home to cover the mortgage balance. So let's say you have a home that is valued at $100,000 and you owe $150,000. That's a $50,000 deficiency, okay? So my question here is, for the hedge fund or for the private equity firm, might you get in this space, and if you are, what is the best way to collect this type of deficiency judgment? And there are a lot of different ways you can do it. So these firms, they will buy pools of mortgage debt. They will then take the pools. They may have a servicer on their own, a debt collector, for lack of a better word, and then it is up to that debt collector to put forth some type of strategy to collect the debt. Okay, and we'll get into more of that in just a minute. So as I mentioned, this idea has attracted a lot of attention, and if you ask why, the answer is very clear. There's a tremendous amount of profit opportunity for it. So as I mentioned, the fund that I work for contacted me. They were not even in this space a couple years before. Okay, so there's always been debt collectors, but not debt collectors in the mortgage space because there really hasn't been a market for that. But in the last several years, there's been a tremendous market for it. We see a lot of people coming into the space. We see a lot of people who really don't know that line of business. And so anytime you try to get into a new line of business, it's always risky if you don't have experience there, if you don't pick up people who know what they're doing in that market. You have first liens that have gone into default and second liens that have gone into default. The fund that I worked for, all we did was buy second liens, okay, pools of second mortgages that were already in default. They'd been in default for anywhere from 1 to 4 years, and it was my job to determine of this pool which ones could be brought back to life and which ones are dead and gone. Okay, so I use the analogy of if somebody has drowned in your swimming pool, if it's inside of a minute, pull them out, help them out, right? CPR. If it's been 10 minutes, probably just call somebody. So I'm only a little bit joking there, but the idea is that these loans cannot be salvaged at some point. And there's a whole bunch of legal ramifications that fall from it. So debt collectors in the past, you've probably heard horror stories about this. They do bad things. They show up on your doorstep, they knock on it, they call you at work, they use derogatory terms to describe you to other people. And these things are not really kosher, but they're done. The Dodd-Frank Act introduced something called the CFPB, and that organization, among many other things, basically said, you're not going to do business the old way. We're not going to do it that way. We're going to have some civility in it, and you're going to do things by the book. Go about collecting your debt, but do it in a very reasonable and professional fashion. And the folks in the industry are having a hard time with this because they're not always sure what they can get away with. They're not always sure what is appropriate, what's not appropriate. Where's the line drawn? When have you crossed the line? And so part of what we did as a firm is we would hire attorneys to try to give us advice on what we could and could not do. And I'll just tell you, from an inside perspective, a lot of times they didn't know. And I was like, wow, we're hiring these national, law firms out of New York, and they don't even know the answer. So nobody knows the answer. And even if you did know the answer at one point in time, that answer might change over time. So it's a pretty interesting space, a dangerous space, but one that's clearly highly profitable. So let me talk with you about a theory. And I'm going to make this super, super simple. You can look at a couple of the letters I put up there. But as I said, I'm not going to bore you with a bunch of Greek symbols. Imagine that you are at a restaurant. And you've just had your dinner, and everything was great. And then the waiter comes by, and he says to you, we have choices for dessert. We have an apple pie, and we have a blueberry pie. And you say, I like apple pie. I'll take that apple pie. Okay, be right back. Waiter disappears. He comes back. He says, I just learned when I went back in the kitchen to place your order that we also have cherry pie. And in response, you say, I don't really like cherry pie. So change my order to blueberry. That makes no sense at all, right? It makes absolutely no sense. If you preferred apple over blueberry, and I introduce a third alternative that you do not like, you should just ignore that choice and go with your original choice. Okay? But studies have found in a qualitative sense, like a preference sense, that this violation can occur. And I know that sounds incredibly strange, but you'll see evidence of it happening again. So here I have it a little bit more mapped out. It's called the decoy effect because that cherry pie, that slice of cherry pie, it is only meant not to be chosen, but to make you go from apple to blueberry. So it's a decoy. It's kind of like a red herring, if you will. So nobody picks the cherry, but it does cause them sometimes, obviously not everybody, to change their preference. I'll give you another colorful example. Before I do, let me tell you why this thing might work. You might think that's crazy. Nobody's going to do that. That's irrational. Okay, but remember, our brain works on more things than just what we consider rationality. It cares about a lot of social aspects. Your brain makes decisions not in absolute terms, but in relative terms. And all that means is when you are presented with 3 or call it 10 different choices, the way that your brain works is you start to compare those choices. Okay, one-to-one comparisons. You don't compare all 10 at once. It's too complicated, too much for you to keep in your head. You start to compare them one by one, and then you can rule things out. So let me give you another example. This one's a little bit playful, and I didn't make it up. So let's say that I have pre-tested this on a large number of males, and I do my best to get 2 photographs in front of a new group of males. I've pre-tested it, now I go to a full-on test. And I have a photograph of an attractive brunette and an attractive blonde. So whether you like one or the other, I've accounted for that. And roughly half the people are going to prefer the brunette, and roughly half the men in the room are going to prefer the blonde. They think, yeah, that's who I think is more attractive. Now, by the same reasoning as I used with the pie, let's say that I introduce a second blonde, a third female. Now, that second blonde is very similar to the other blonde, not just in hair color, but has some of the same features as well. But she is clearly not as attractive as that blonde. So you already know how the story is going to end. Normally, you would think, well, no one's going to choose that second blonde. She's inferior, so they'll just not choose her, and they'll keep 50-50. But again, that's not how it works. Some of the folks over here, usually maybe 20 to 80 now, some of these folks will leave saying, I don't think the brunette, I think it's now this more attractive blonde over here. Again, seems to make no sense on the surface, but it has been explained through the pairwise comparison. So you just get kind of suckered in when you see two things that are similar to each other. Okay? You don't realize you're doing it. If you thought about it enough, you could probably avoid the pitfall. But we don't always know why our brain works. So up until this point of the study, this has only been done on qualitative considerations. Right? People have only done this, and they said, well, I can't really say people are right or wrong. I mean, I know their choices are ordered differently, so that seems to be a violation. But I can't really say you're wrong because it's just a matter of preference. Your choice in pie or attractiveness, whatever, that's a matter of opinion. In this study, I'm trying to make this very, very applied to the real world, specifically debt collection and the mortgage default space. And I need to quantify it because I can't walk into Blackstone and say, hey guys, I have an idea, and it works, maybe, on a qualitative level, fuzzy, kind of stuff. They need to know, no, tell me what it works. You need to demonstrate that it works. I need to know that it makes enough money for us to implement. Otherwise, I don't really care, and they won't give me a meeting. Separate theory that I'm going to introduce at the same time. If you're going to embark on a massive experiment like this, you want to test every little sub-hypothesis that you can possibly test. So this is an interesting thing. Leftmost digit effect. If you look at prices around the world, whether you're buying a shirt at Walmart or you're buying a home in Australia, it really doesn't matter what the asset is or how great the price tag is. You could, for example, say this shirt costs $20. You could also price it like Walmart does at $19.97. And the reason why they bother with that 3 cents is not because they're trying to give you some super bargain, right? It's because they want you to store that number or think of that number, think of that clothing item, the shirt. They want you to think of it as being less expensive than it really is. Now, some of you are saying, okay, that's insulting because if I see something for $19.99 or $19.97, clearly I know it's only 3 cents different from $20. But here's the interesting part. If I ask you 1 minute after you saw a shirt for $20 and a shirt for $19.97, yes, absolutely, you will say that is 3 cents cheaper, and 3 cents is really nothing to me. I really don't care about it, so I view them as being exactly the same price. Close enough. But if I wait a week and I say, hey, do you remember last time we were in Walmart and I showed you those two shirts, and which one was cheaper? And you'd say, I think that one was cheaper by, I don't know, maybe $3 or $4. It's weird, but that's the way that your brain will do it. And the reason why is because you read, like words, you read numbers left to right. And your brain already starts hard coding or storing that 1. And then it goes to the 9, then it goes to the second 9, then to the 7. So it starts to record those. As you go to the right, your brain starts to care less about those numbers. And the reason why is because every time you go 1 digit to the right, you have 10 times less value. So your brain is like, yeah, I don't really have to remember those numbers. Whether it's 97 cents or 96 cents, who cares? A penny's not important to me. I can almost just stop reading this thing. Okay? So again, your brain working on a subconscious level, taking shortcuts that you have not necessarily endorsed, but your brain knows to do that. Otherwise, you couldn't possibly get done all the things that you do on a daily basis. Right? So I just wondered, could I use the leftmost digit effect as it relates to presenting these folks with options, payment streams, if you will? Would it matter if the payment amount was very, very similar, but one payment had a smaller leftmost digit? Could I throw people off by doing that? I don't know. It's a hypothesis, so we have to test it. It's interesting because if you go around the world and you look at currencies that don't even have the penny, I mean, we still have the penny in the U.S. for who knows what reason. But if you look at other currencies that don't, like Australia, they still price things in the fraction they're in. So 96, 97, 98, 99, they still price like that. And if your change results in a multiple that's not 0.05, you won't get that change. They just round it off. And no one cares again because the penny is so invaluable. So it's interesting that they keep the same pricing strategies, even though there's no way to technically carry those out. So just a fun little fact there. I've got some papers on this as it relates to residential housing and whether it makes sense to price at $200,000 or $199 or $199, $742, a precise price. But again, that's off topic. So here's what I would do in a perfect world. As academics, even as a person who worked in industry for several years, we have ways that we know would be ideal to carry out our studies. And I'll tell you the perfect way to carry out this study. Perfect way is, I'm on the inside of the hedge. I was the chief economist there, so I had a pretty high position. But we did not own the servicer. We farmed that out. We outsourced it to somebody else because that's a whole nother line of business, and yeah, we didn't want to go there. So the servicer was collecting debt. Now, what I would love to have done is what's called a field study. Okay, so this is like an experiment that happens out there in the real world. So in a field study, what you do is you have your theories like I presented here, and I'll tie it all together for you in a moment. But you have your theories and you tell the collection agency, here's how we are going to collect this debt. Follow my theories to the letter. And then what we'll do is after a period of time, maybe 6 months, maybe 12 months, then we'll go back and we'll see which horse won the race. And we'll know which strategies are effective and which ones are not. That's what you love to do because then you get to see if what you found in the lab does apply in the real world. Okay? Well, I didn't stay in there long enough to test that theory. There are all kinds of personal reasons I won't get into, but I did that for a while and then decided I wasn't going to do it anymore. As you heard from my introduction, I'm considering getting back into that space now because it's pretty cool. The other option is to simply take what we call transactions data, the servicing records of existing loans. The problem is there, while it is real data, which you love, that real data does not reflect my collection strategy. So I can analyze it all day, but I'll never tie that to my theories because they did not implement my theories. And they didn't, with surgical precision, cut exactly how my theories would play out and test them against each other and so forth. So I really can't use secondary data to test my hypotheses. I have to either go out in the field and do it, and I said that didn't work. I then am going to do kind of an in-house experiment or a laboratory type experiment. Now, with every study, I say there's flaws. There's no such thing as a perfect study. This study is certainly no different. The question that always remains when you do an experiment is, did what you find in the lab, did that or does that apply into the real world? And without testing it for sure, you never know. So let's say I go to Blackstone next month, knock it out of the park. They love it. They love me. They love the idea. They'll have to implement that, and I could still be wrong. Okay? So everything that I say today, I could be wrong. But everyone should say that, right? We should all be open to that. So let me tell you how I did this. I wanted to get a large national sample of homeowners and present them with these strategies. Now, I don't really tell them the purpose of what I'm doing. If you conduct an experiment and your subjects know what the experiment is all about, then you've contaminated the experiment. You might as well not even carry it out. So it's very important that you give them enough information to complete the task, but they don't get to see the forest for the trees. They have one single treatment path that they go down. And there are a total of 12 treatments in this particular study. It changes by study. But they have no idea that the other 11 even exist. Okay, and that's how you get results without contaminating your sample. But I have homeowners from across all 50 states, including DC, so that's nice. You don't want to say, oh, I wonder if it only worked in the Midwest where I tested it. Okay, so we tested nationally. Also, you want to incentivize these people to do the best job humanly possible. So in addition to paying everyone to participate, I pay people double if they finish in the top third in terms of performance. So I haven't really explained the game yet, but just to give you a sense, I need these people to take it as seriously as humanly possible. Otherwise, maybe it's just a random Christmas tree type thing and my results are just spurious. So I don't want to risk that. For a different audience, I would tell you all about these different cross-checks that I do, but just trust me when I say, do everything humanly possible to make sure that this data is as good as it possibly can be. So here's the scenario that I present them with. Don't bother reading this. I'll just kind of give you the gist of it. Folks have defaulted on a mortgage debt. There is a $100,000 deficiency judgment, and I'm going to present them with either 2 or, in some cases, 3 alternative cash flow repayment streams. So they're going to have to select into one. And when I have only 2, that is like apple pie and blueberry pie. When I present them with a third, that involves the decoy effect, okay, the cherry pie. So I'll give you a little bit more information on that. I said there are 12 treatments total. You might say, well, why do you have 12 treatments? Well, the reason why is because I have 3 different theories and they need to be sub-tested. Okay? So I mentioned some of them have 2, some have 3. The ones with 3 are for the decoy. I also want to test, is it better that the decoy is similar in the number of total payments that need to be made, or is it better that it is in the dollar amount of the monthly payments that need to be made? It's a fair question. I don't know the answer to it, so we have to test it. I also, as I mentioned, talk about the leftmost digit effect. I'll show you all these in just a minute so that you can see them. And I do things that experimenters know to do, like introduce all of this stuff randomly. So if one person were to be invited into the experiment and they were to see the treatments, all of the options are going to be in scrambled order. There's never a statement of, 1's always best and 3's always worse. It's always randomized and scrambled. And the other interesting thing is I have both a within subjects design and a between subjects design. And all that means is, I mentioned that when you first go into this experimental setting, you will be put into one of the 12 paths. Now at that point, you don't know the other 11 exist. However, after you finish that path, as a way to get within subjects data, I then allow you to go into another path and another one and another one. All of those are also scrambled and their answer choices are scrambled within. But the reason I do that is because I'm curious if people will learn the game as they go. And all kinds of reasons why I'll explain later. So I have both a within subjects and between subjects design and collect a tremendous amount of data as we go through. This was a major decision that I had to make when doing the study. Let's say I go into Blackstone and I say, hey guys, I have this idea and it worked. I was able to cause 50% of the people to go from apple pie to blueberry pie. Okay? And that's really what I'm doing. If you see these 3 options up here and a rate of return next to it, I am intentionally spreading the rate of return by 9%, because if Blackstone says, hey, you spread by 1% and you got them to go for it, well, great, you tweaked our return up by 1%, but we're making like 40 to 50% on all these investments. Why do I care about your measly 1%? So you don't want to go too low. If you go too low, you're going to trick a lot of people, but who cares? It's a cheap card trip that wasn't even that sophisticated. On the other hand, if you go too greedy and you say, well, I'm going to have 20% be the difference in return. I'm going to shift people out of a 0% return and into a 20% return for us, the hedge fund. If you get too greedy, people are going to know something's up and they're not going to fall for it, right? My magic trick can only be so magical, in other words. So I have to decide, as a person designing the study, what would be a reasonable spread and still allowing this thing to work? What would get Blackstone's attention, but also be successful? And frankly, I didn't know the answer to that. We often don't know the answers before we embark on studies. So I picked 9%. I thought that would be enough to pique their interest, and we'll find out next month if I was correct. Option number 3, again, these are not presented in the same order because we don't want people to catch on that there is a, option 1's the best and so forth. But option 3, as I presented here, is the decoy. And we never expect people to pick the decoy. The decoy, as you recall, is only there to move them from what they should do into what we would prefer they do. That's the only purpose of the decoy. Nobody picks the decoy unless they don't know what they're doing. Now, I know this is relatively small, even on a huge screen like this. I'm just going to give you the idea. You don't have to read all these lines. The first group are the set of treatments that relate to a similarity in payment. So I'll just tell you a couple of the numbers up here. The number of payments. So in panel A, you have 2 of those options. They're going to be presented with either 2 or 3. 2 of the options have the exact same number of total payments. If you were to do the math on this, you would see the returns from the prior slide. It works out perfectly every single time. But 61 and 61, so that's a similarity in the total number of payments before the stream is going to be exhausted. If you jump down to panel C and D, panel C and D is a similarity in the payment amount. So just to pull numbers off there in panel D, we've got 22.24, and the one above it, 22.13. So that's pretty close. They're not identical, and they can't be identical because then the math won't work out to be exactly that return. So the returns are always as I've laid them out, and I had to play with this a lot to make sure that the payment amount is very similar. And then the leftmost digit effect, if you were to look up in, let's say, panel A again, you have a payment amount that is 2,000, another one's 2,000, and then the other one has a different leftmost digit. So we only care about that first digit. So as you can see, every other panel jumps. So it's just a way to test my 3 sub-hypotheses all in the same data collection effort. The bottom, I have a similarity in both. All right. So I'm not going to show you all the statistical tests. I'm just going to bottom line this for you. So if you look at the red writing that I put, that's really all that you need to see. The p-value shows significance across all of these comparisons. So I take the different treatments. I've got several hundred people who have gone through each treatment. I compare their responses, and the error rates are significantly different for every single one of the pairwise treatments. In other words, that is to say, the decoy has done its job. It's moving the needle. It's pushing people off where they should be into where we want them to be. It's not doing it for everybody, but it is doing it for more than half the folks. Interestingly enough, the very bottom panel, the leftmost digit is working against the hedge fund. It is not doing what I anticipated it might do. It's not boosting returns, it's actually dampening the returns. So you can be sure that I will share this result, but I would not recommend that it be adopted. Maybe there's another thing that I can do in order to boost the return even further. This is not it. In fact, it worked significantly in the opposite direction. But hey, that's why we try stuff. Okay, so then the question becomes, the decoy effect does work, but were you referring to the decoy and the number of payments or the payment amount? And so this table does what we call a comparison for those two different treatment pairwise. And it is the payment amount that people care about. So let's say that you are the defaulted homeowner and you get a letter in the mail, and there's three options on there. You're going to focus on the payment amount as opposed to the number of total payments. And that's probably a reasonable hypothesis to get on board with, because if you think about most people and how they manage their money, they're working off of a monthly budget anyway, right? So it seems pretty reasonable that they would focus on what is the affordability of this payment stream. Not necessarily, am I going to pay it for 48 or 61 months? We'll worry about 5 years later, okay? So I think that's a pretty consistent conclusion with what we might have thought. Now, this whole table, I just want you to focus on the bottom part, the very last red indicator. 44.3% of the people, when you look across their 12 scenarios, they chose what was in their best interest 12 out of 12 times. So I paid a lot more people a bonus than I had intended, but hey, that's what outside funding is for. So you could not trick 44.3% of the people, or you could say that I tricked over half the people. Depends on what you want to tell the story. But I think it's still interesting. I think it's still significant. Overall, the effect is there, but it also concentrates in a certain group of people. I'm going to show you a quick slide, and so that half the people in the room don't hate me, I'm going to blow past that slide. I'm always asked, okay, great, so this is a strategy. Who do you think it's going to be most effective on? So don't blame me. This is the data talking. I'm going to put it up. Who is less susceptible? I'm just going to blow right past it. There's a list, but I'm not leaving that up there. Again, this is not me saying that. And it might not work in reality. But let me give you some conclusions, and then we can use the remainder of the time to do a Q&A session, because we will have time left over. Okay, so the whole idea behind this, there is, again, a tremendous amount of unwound debt out there. You've heard it called toxic debt, but it is folks who have defaulted on both first and second liens of the mortgage. Sometimes they only do one, sometimes they do the other. But that bad debt needs to be resolved. People are doing it on an individual level. People are doing it by buying the asset. They'll buy the entire home, and they'll hope that the home prices will rebound, and therefore they'll resell it, and they'll have equity that way. Other people say, no, I want to just buy the note on that asset and to keep it a financial thing, not a hard asset thing, okay? So this is on the financial note. So when we take this amount, how do we resolve it? And a little interesting aside, you might think that the people who owe this money don't want to talk to you. And out of kind of a knee-jerk reaction, a lot of times that's true. But once you get into a conversation, you learn that you are unwinding their toxic debt as well as what now is on your balance sheet, your own toxic debt. You're actually helping out both people if you can work to an amicable solution. And oh, by the way, I haven't mentioned this. In the industry, if you can get a non-performing loan to perform for 6 months, you can resell it to a different group of people who have an appetite for less risk, okay, not a non-performing loan, but there are plenty of middle players who have an appetite for a loan that is re-performing. They call it a cure or self-cure. There is an appetite for that, but it needs to be about 6 months, because that's when it has been long enough to reasonably believe that the loan will continue to perform. Okay? So we can sell this off. We don't have to hold these notes forever and ever, which is kind of nice. Asymmetric dominance, the effect does work. The decoy effect does work. Not to everybody, but it does work to some. The leftmost digit effect does not work. I hypothesized why. I thought, okay, why would that be? Because I know it works in housing. We've demonstrated that. It works in shirts and other apparel, things of that nature. It works around the world. So why wouldn't it work here? And my best guess, untested, so don't hold me to it, but my best guess is maybe the reason why it works is because, or doesn't work here, works against you, is because those numbers being different on the first digit, it might draw more attention to it. It might actually cause people to focus more acutely on that number and scrutinize it more, which would enable them to identify the return is not as favorable. I can't say that's true. That's my initial thought. I'd love to hear yours if you have other ideas. And then on my side notes here, a couple of side notes. People ask me all the time, strategic default. I've got so many papers on this area. What percentage of the market are strategic defaults? I mean, I know defaults are defaults, but of the defaults, what percentage are just simply because people lost their job or got divorced or had a death in the family, a prolonged illness? There's all kinds of reasons that Fannie and Freddie have put forth. But of all the mortgages, how many are because people just can't afford to pay it? And how many are because people have consciously chosen not to pay it? And by my estimate in this study, it's 17% roughly. Other studies have been as high as 26%, as low as 14%. So it does vary. It varies by sample. It also varies over time, because when people have seen their home prices be significantly underwater, so a loan-to-value ratio is way above 100, if you have an LTV that's above 100 and you don't think that home prices are going to rebound, people are much more likely to walk away. Conversely, even if home prices are underwater by the same amount, but you think things are going to get better in 6 months, let's just hang on, they will get better, then you're more likely not to default. There's also other considerations about how do I feel about my lender. If your lender has engaged in a lot of egregious activity, people are much more likely to default on that person as if they're penalizing them, right, for bad behavior. It's interesting. If you look at a thing called the ultimatum game, you have two players on the other side. It's a game of trust, and it's a game of fairness. People don't like to be treated unfairly, and they'll actually take a loss in order to punish what they perceive to be someone who is not acting in a fair or moral manner. So as a lender, if you're in that market, then make sure you treat your customers well, because studies have shown, mine and others, that the borrowers do care, and they will retaliate in a way that you might think they wouldn't. You would think, you're going to burn the whole place down, yourself included, just to hurt me? Yeah, it's been done before. Okay? So I could go on, but what I'd like to do now is I'd like to open it up for questions. Yes? Mm-hmm. Okay, so you are forcing my hand. I will put that slide back up. Yeah, well, for them, I don't mind if I offend people in that room, but I'm going up to see a guy named CJ, Christopher James. Yeah. Okay, so in this, what we do, and I explain this differently depending on who I'm talking to. In finance and economics, they love regressions. But when you do an experiment, you really only need univariate tests because you've done all your controls on the front end, whereas with secondary data, you have to do it on the back end. But here, I said, okay, fine, reviewers, editor, you want to see a logistic regression, let's do it. And so I know it's small, but I wanted to get it all on one screen. You throw all these demographic variables on there, and variables like education are highly correlated with income and wealth, so you can't really throw everything in there. But the variables that have been chosen here, there are only 3 that were significant. All right, and that's a Caucasian dummy, a male, and those with higher net worth. Now, I don't want to, again, say that these folks are any smarter or whatever. Men have their problems. We're overconfident. When we invest in the stock market, we trade too much and we lose a lot more money. So, we get our knocks in other areas. Also, it could be the case in terms of nationality. Maybe Caucasians know the market better, and so they know how to do the calculation, or they at least know how the market works. So maybe they got the experiment better. There's all kinds of alternative explanations that I could put on there. Certainly the net worth one seems to make sense because those folks probably have had a more advantageous upbringing in terms of education and so forth. So these are the results that we found here. I can tell you from other studies they're not always consistent. And I did not have what we call a priori expectations of the sign of these variables. I threw them in there as kind of an exploratory analysis, and I made that clear in the paper that I had no preconceived notion as to where they might end up. Again, they are different by study, and there's no real theory behind it that says it should work out a certain way. Does that answer the question? Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Dr. Simons. Right. Right. And that's a great question. It's also always a sticky situation. So if you look at financial literacy rates, they are also not favorable for folks in lower socioeconomic standing. And they unfortunately have been, therefore, the target of subprime lending and the like. So you have to be really, really careful. And also with the CFPB looking over your shoulder at all points, you have to be really, really, really careful. So I don't know that I wouldn't want to make any public statements, certainly, but I would just tell them that the data is what it is. Let's do the field study and start to implement the data. Let's do it uniformly across all the different pools. Let's not worry about the size of the node or anything like that until we learn more. As you have collected this data for a couple of months, it will certainly roll in and you'll start to get a better sense of who it does and does not work for. But yes, it's a very sticky situation and a slippery slope. If you start targeting groups that are less able to defend themselves, that will not go well. I will give you just a quick example. We have several friends at Fannie and Freddie, and I have pitched to them this layered voice analysis study because I found significance as it related to CEOs and CFOs of REITs. And I thought, if it works for them, couldn't we implement this to a homeowner who calls their lender and says, I'd like a modification on my loan? So the problem is that a lot of people who need a modification, they don't get the modification because of something called the moral hazard problem. So let's say that your neighbor is in economic need and that person supplies financial documents and they do get a modification. And then you say, well, Bob over here got a modification. Why can't I get a modification? Okay, well, I don't really need one, but you got your interest rate lowered or you got principal waived. I would love to have that reduction as well. So then you apply. You don't really need the help, but you apply. And then and then someone else does it. So what happens is you have a lender who initially tried to do the right thing, but the law of unintended consequences is that they started giving modifications to people who don't need them. And then they just have to say, okay, that's it, no more mods for anybody, and then the whole system shuts down. So it's very, very tough to do that. With Fannie and Freddie, what I said was, if I use layered voice analysis, could we, when you talk to these people anyway, I'm not asking for an extra step, could you just simply record the conversations and then let me analyze them with this data? And I believe, I don't know for sure because I haven't done it with that group of people, but I said, I believe that I could tell you who really needs that and who doesn't need it, who just wants it. You would think, maybe, you would think that that would be very well received because if you were in a position to modify a loan and you knew that the borrower didn't need a modification, you definitely would not want to modify their loan because they're going to keep paying you anyway. So why would you give them more favorable terms if they're going to continue to be active? But I was met with a resounding, that can never happen. Fannie and Freddie are under great scrutiny, as you know. It's gotten a little better recently, but they were very much under the microscope, as they should be. And he said if we did that, we would get so hammered in the press. I mean, I wouldn't even be able to finish a public statement before the press just started, throwing, pitchforks and fire and stuff like that at me. So a lot of things can't happen for political reasons, and I will tell you that that's one of the benefits of working for a hedge fund, because for a while there when the CFPB came out, we weren't exactly sure if they were an overseeing body or not. That was one of the many questions we asked attorneys. And the attorneys, again, said, we're not really sure, but maybe you should play it close to the vest until we know for sure, because you don't want to be the guinea pig, right? You don't want to be the one that case studies are written about in the years to come. So we really didn't have a sense of how that would work. But I do think that it would be very tough, and if you do that, I think you take the risk, take your life in your own hands, so to speak. All right, we have about 10 more minutes. Other questions? Yes? Right, so let me make sure everyone heard the question. So the question is, if you have a greater reserve requirement, is that going to mitigate this problem to any extent? And I would say that the more specific solutions that have been put in place to prevent this from happening in the future is the whole skin in the game type argument. So no longer can you originate a loan and sell 100% off of it, to somebody else, because as a homeowner you thought, well, no one's going to loan me money unless they feel confident I can pay it back. Well, yeah, they would if they don't continue to own that note. They give it off to somebody else. They frankly don't care what happens after that. So now you have the skin in the game concept where you have to keep a portion of it, or at least a portion of the pools. And I will tell you, one of the folks that we buy pools from, and we don't get to cherry pick, by the way. You buy an entire pool, the good and the bad, the collectible and the uncollectible. You get that pool, and then you look at the tape, and PNC, one of the banks that we use, PNC says, well, from now on, guys, you have the added burden. Once you get the pool, you have got to hold that pool for a longer period of time. You can't just settle, or you can settle, and then there is no loan anymore, but you can't just make those loans perform and then ditch them all. You have to stick around for it, because if you think about it, there was a time when we were buying these things for 2 to 4 cents on the dollar, which I know is ridiculous, but just remember that part of that portfolio, people had already filed bankruptcy. That was completely uncollectible debt. Just like you can discharge credit card debt, not student loans, but credit card debt or auto loans, you could discharge this mortgage debt by filing bankruptcy. So we were holding assets that were completely worthless at the time we bought them. Now, you can't, when you get to look at the tape, they do send you the tape early to get a sense of what loans are in there. And we try to do our best to apply a mathematical model and get a value for the maximum amount we were willing to pay for the entire pool. But that's not a very long time to pull the trigger on these deals, because you have other people competing with you. And so it's a bit of a quick decision that you have to make. And I don't know, with the new idea that you have to hold these things longer term, that just raises the price of these things. You're no longer buying them at a substantial discount. Still a good discount. And this is second liens, by the way. First liens are far more expensive because there's actual collateral. The value of the home is still there. But yeah, the second liens are a lot more pricey. Maybe they're 20, 25 cents. Really depends on the pool. But still quite substantial, because a second lien, of course, is a junior claim compared to the first lien. And a lot of times when you settle these things out, the first and second get together, and if they can cooperate, which is not always the case, if they cooperate, a lot of times the second lien holder will get $6,000. Doesn't matter if their note is $80,000. They'll get about $6,000 on it, and that's kind of, I don't know why that number has emerged, but that's just kind of the industry number. Yes? Yep. Mm-hmm. If you look at the literature that gets sent out to these folks, there's not an APR on there. The way that it works is your APR, a lot of people were putting it there, and it was so small you have to take 2 sets of reading glasses and put one in front of the other. But technically they don't. But I am curious to see how that has evolved, because I mentioned I've been out of the space for a while, and this is my consideration to get back into it. So maybe things have changed in the year and a half that I have been out of the game, so to speak. But to my knowledge, no, you don't have to do that. But also, to your logic, I think you absolutely should have to do that. And again, I could be wrong. Maybe you do now. But there was a time when you did not do that. So there are a lot of things from a marketing perspective, how you present this information. Now everyone seems to be smiling. The folks in the photos are attractive. There are shiny house keys that it's not the type of letter, they're all on glossy finish, like the wonderful brochures that we have here. So it's not the type of collection letter that you're used to. You know how they say it's not your parents' collection letter. It's a totally different look to it nowadays. Okay, we have about 5 more minutes if you have any additional questions. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, I certainly hope that it would. I describe this as a finesse way of bolstering your returns, as opposed to calling people in the middle of the night and calling their employer and doing things like that. Both methods could be argued to increase returns. I certainly think this one is more humane. This one is certainly more legal. At the same time, people might be not excited because they say you're using parlor tricks to, get more money out of people. So I don't know, which is better, to be psychologically, duped or hoodwinked or whatever, or just to be badgered? I don't know. I mean, that's if I'm being critical of my idea, right? Hopefully, I'd like to think my idea is quite humane and sterile and so forth. But yeah, I would love to believe a study like this could help. I also don't have illusions of grandeur that anyone outside of this is going to really care what I'm doing. I'm just kidding. I hope they are. But I couldn't say that one study in particular will change the industry, but I would love to be a part of that change because I think it's a change for the better. Yes? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so again, if one were to critically look at this and say, hey, what you're doing, it might be clever, but it's not used for good, that's a fair criticism, right? But by the same time, you could ask this from the other perspective. Who am I representing in this paper? Because in a lot of the research studies that we do, we're supposed to be independent, like a third-party observer that's just simply looking at a world, and we have no dog in the fight, so to speak. From this perspective, I do have a position that is being taken. I don't think it's evident when you read it, but I think the inferences that you could make might appear to be evident. And I've been perfectly honest with everyone here today. I'm telling you what side I'm on and why I'm doing this study and so forth. But I think if you just read the study objectively, you wouldn't get a sense of that, like what side I'm on or whatever. But yes, anytime you create something like this, even an illusionist, right? You know what the difference is between a pickpocket and an illusionist? The illusionist is just trying to entertain you. That's really the difference. They both have the same skill set. They both know how to make you not look at the hand they don't want you to be looking at, but one is taking advantage of you and the other is entertaining you. So it's just a difference in perspective. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so it's interesting because I lived in Hawaii for 11 years, as I mentioned, and we had the same situation, a lot of second homeowners, and folks had defaulted, and then we were like, well, we are not getting our maintenance fees, so someone else has to pick up that slack. And it was something that we had done, and we did that a long time ago. So that is absolutely what's going on. You're completely correct in that. The strategy, in theory, could be used by anybody. Maybe the board would like to implement a strategy like this. So there's no reason why they wouldn't do it. This is certainly not copyrighted in any way, shape, or form. If someone decides that it could be used to help out their organization, I would say give it a test. I know we are almost out of time. If there's maybe one last question. Okay, well, let me give you my sincere thank you for being here today. Again, I want to acknowledge Cleveland State University, the sponsors of this organization, Jim Webb, Paul Everson. I'm very honored to be here, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today, and I look forward to talking with you afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Seiler. I'd now like to welcome Joe Marinucci, the president and CEO of the Downtown Cleveland Alliance, to speak on the live, work, play concept and how it relates to us living in downtown Cleveland. So please welcome Mr. Joe Marinucci.
Forgive me, I am technology challenged, so Heather, either you or maybe Heather can help me get my slides up. Yeah, that's what I thought. First of all, let me say how much I appreciate joining you. I think I've spoken at this session historically, and I really appreciate the invitation to join you. I am a Cleveland State University graduate. I think, is this Alumni Week here? or is that coming up? But it's obviously great to see a lot of the activities that have occurred on campus. And I'd be remiss if I really didn't say at the onset how important what Cleveland State University, from a development perspective, is doing to the development that we're seeing in downtown Cleveland. It really is, as Michael indicated, fascinating to see the changes on campus. It's great to see a crane in the neighborhood, and great to see some of the additional activities that are being planned. I know President Berkman and Stephanie McHenry are going to be entertaining an RFQ for some additional development here on campus and some of the adjoining parcels on campus. And again, from my perspective, I think it's fabulous, and it's great to see. I think many of you know that years ago, there was a movement in some ways to reduce education from campuses to more online learning. And I'm really pleased that that has not really infiltrated Cleveland State. And although there is online learning as part of the strategy, it's really a very aggressive real estate development strategy that's moving forward. Let me talk a little bit about the Alliance. We're a nonprofit organization that represents the property owners, the stakeholders, the businesses in downtown Cleveland. And in that role, we really have two halves, I think, to our mission. One is to improve the pedestrian experience in downtown Cleveland, and by doing so, working again with those stakeholders, trying to attract additional investment into downtown. And really, when you step back and think about downtown Cleveland historically, for those of that in the room that remember the downtown of the 50s or the 60s or the 70s, you know that historically we were a Fortune 500 driven downtown economy, if you will. We had a lot of large corporations that were headquartered here. I think at one point we had the third largest concentration of Fortune 500 companies in downtown Cleveland. And if you think about it, beginning in the 80s and really preceding that into the 70s, as the transformation in the economy in Northeast Ohio began to occur, and we lost companies like LTV Steel, which, by the way, had 500,000 square feet of space in downtown Cleveland. When we lost BP to Chicago through the merger with Amoco, you start to see the impact that that had. And when the Alliance was created nearly 11 years ago, part of our challenge, as David Browning knows, is we had almost 4 million square feet of empty A and B space in downtown Cleveland, not including C space, but A and B space. So from our perspective, creating a live-work environment, creating a mixed-use environment really became very, very important. And again, we recognized that there was no magic bullet. There was no way that we were going to attract 4 or 5 progressive corporations into downtown and magically turn all that empty space into occupied space. We knew that this had to be an incremental strategy. We knew that it had to be multifaceted in terms of that approach. And in many ways, creating the type of environment where residents will want to live became one of the things that was very, very important to us going forward. And the downtown property owners, a number of years ago, again 11 years ago, decided to come together to create really the first step in this process. And that is, can you hear me okay? The first step in the process was really our special improvement district, which allowed us to create our Clean and Safe program. And again, when you talk about behavioral perceptions and activities and why people make choices, if you think of downtown Cleveland 12, 13, 14, 15 years ago, the perception was still that it was unsafe, it was unclean. It was not a place that necessarily you'd make a decision to live and potentially play in very aggressively. And again, think back years ago, we have these images, these beautiful images of coming to downtown Cleveland and going to all the department stores. Well, remember something, the department stores all closed at 6 o'clock on weekdays. They weren't open at night. They were open on Saturdays, and all of our visual and mental imagery really are those Saturday afternoons when you came downtown. So for us, we really, again, have to refocus ourselves and think about how do we create that multiple dimension approach. And again, Clean and Safe in many ways has been the foundation going forward. We now have about 75 ambassadors working on a daily basis in downtown Cleveland. It really, by all discernible measures, and I'm not sure we've had an empirical study done on this, but it's changed the perception of downtown. Whether you see an ambassador, whether you interact with an ambassador, whether you don't see an ambassador, you know that one is nearby and one potentially could be available to help you in terms of your experience. The second thing, as we evolved in terms of downtown, is that we recognized that, again, walkability really became a very important criteria for us. Again, downtown, if you think about it, had some great success in terms of our districts. If you think of the Warehouse District, think of the Gateway District, that obviously blossomed with the investment of the Gateway Complex and bringing the Cavaliers and the Indians to that site. We had great success in limited geographies, but we didn't necessarily have the connectivity and the walkability that allowed us to move forward. And 2 years ago, we released a study called Step Up Downtown, and in that study, we recognized that the connective tissue in terms of the next evolutionary steps for downtown Cleveland was vitally important. And we identified some very aggressive interactions, actually 18 interactions, to better connect the neighborhoods of downtown and to give people, again, the ability to walk. It's fascinating for a Clevelander, walking from 9th Street to Lower Euclid to Public Square. In some ways, nobody felt real comfortable years ago, if you think about it. Walking through the East 12th to East 9th Street area currently, you feel a little uncomfortable about that. And why do we feel it? It's not that long a distance. If you think about it, if you were in Manhattan, you would walk that in a heartbeat. You wouldn't get into a cab or use Uber. You'd walk that distance. So we recognize that we have to better improve that experience and make that connectivity. And again, the best example of this right now, I think, is Public Square. For those of you that haven't seen the new square, I hope you've experienced it. It really has now brought together the Warehouse District with Lower Euclid and ultimately up into the Playhouse Square and the CSU campus area. If you think about it, it's now a continual horizontal relationship that we're close to being able, from an interconnectivity perspective, create. And that type of interconnectivity really is important. Things like the free trolleys that we work with RTA to provide up and down Euclid Avenue and in the Warehouse and the Erie View districts are very important. The bike share program that suddenly has been created, I think you saw that in anticipation of the RNC. University Hospitals became the main sponsor for that. Those types of things, again, create the type of environment that we think can move things forward. And there are more difficult challenges. If you think about the relationship between, for example, the Warehouse District and the Flats East Bank project, how many of you have walked down Main Avenue and gone under the bridge to that location? Probably a few of you, but how have you felt going in under that bridge in terms of that experience? We know that we have to improve that experience, and that's one of the things we've targeted in terms of those 18 interactions. And again, it's very important that we think in those terms, because our ability to unify the districts and connect them, I think, are going to be very important going forward. Now, obviously, we've had a lot of investment in downtown, and again, if you think about it, we've been very aggressive over the years in terms of attracting investment. We've had $5.5 to $6 billion of new investment that's occurred over the last 6-7 years. The Flats East Bank, Phase 1 and 2, the Hilton, the Convention Center, again, the Public Square improvements. All of these, I think, again, have created the momentum that we're feeling now. And if you think about it, it's done a couple things for us. One is going back to that inventory of vacant buildings or underutilized buildings. It's allowed us to take those buildings and adaptively reuse them and repurpose them, both into residential and into hotel. And CBRE did a great study a little bit ago talking about how by reducing the supply, at the same time our business development team working with partners like the city have increased the supply of companies interested in those space. We've been able to increase occupancy, increase on a per square foot basis, the return that our office market is seeing, and hopefully put more pressure ultimately to create some new product on a boutique basis going forward in terms of the Class A market. So again, if you think about it, we've had great success in those areas. Now, going forward, we need to think in terms of how do we create a ground-up strategy, especially in some of the surface parking lots that many of you have experienced that are the missing teeth in the urban development framework that we have going forward. The Weston development over in the Warehouse District, those surface parking lots, as we all know, have been in place since the, I think, building or before the building of the Justice Center. This represents about a $400 million project, mainly residential driven, a 4-phase project of about $400 million. The Nucleus project, I think many of you are familiar with Bob Stark and the Stark Enterprises proposal, about $400 million. Again, a mixed-use development that would include parking, residential, office, and a hotel. And again, it's that type of strategy that I think we're going to need to see going forward. The days where we created a, shall I say, a key tower, if you think about key tower, when did the Starbucks go into key tower? Substantially after it was built, is the point I'm making. And the point is we can no longer do those types of things where we create isolated towers that people struggle to walk by and in essence aren't animated in the evening. So these mixed-use developments and how the development community is looking at these, I think is much more prone to create the walkability that we're trying to achieve and the mixed-use environment that we hope to achieve as well. The lakefront, I hope you've been able to go down to the lakefront and see Cumberland Development's first phase, the new Mexican restaurant there at the base of East 9th Street. We're having an event there tonight, so if you want to come down and enjoy yourself, we hope that you would. But phase 2, we're anticipating will be a small residential and retail development on what we call the parcel B, or the skating rink parcel. And then ultimately, the larger development opportunity are the parcels north of First Energy Stadium, where we think, working with Trammell Crow, we're going to see a multi-phased approach, again, with ground-up construction, residential and housing going forward. Now, before talking a little bit about the housing sector, I did want to note that one of the things we recently did, and I know Richie Peperinen is actually a panelist very shortly on the next session, but we worked with him to, and his research team to do an analysis of the dynamic engine of a talent-driven economy. And what we asked Richie to do is, although the business development team and our marketing team do a great job of providing benchmarking data on a quarterly basis, we wanted them to look a little more deeply into what's going on, both in terms of the talent attraction perspective of downtown and also the residential attraction of downtown. I think, as you can appreciate, one of the things that we hear a lot about on a day-to-day basis is, gee, the demand has been great, especially in housing. How deep is that demand? How long will it will exist? What will happen in terms of the next set of projects and the projects after that? When you look at some of the work that Richie did for us, again, currently we have 14,000 residents in downtown Cleveland. That's a 79% increase over a 14-year threshold from 2000 to 2014. Interesting enough, during that same period, we had a 107% increase in 25 to 34-year-olds who are living in downtown Cleveland. Again, that's a good stat. It means that we're not simply having young professionals move into downtown, we're having now people in the more older millennium phase and the Generation X phase staying in downtown Cleveland going forward. We've added during that period 3,640 housing units. And to give you some sense, by the end of the year to the first quarter of next year, we will add 1,000 additional units that are currently under construction. And we have about 2,300 additional housing units that are in what we call the advanced planning stages or the pre-engineering phases or pre-design phases. We think all of those additional units will reach fruition in the years to come. That should put us on a short-term basis at about 15,500 in terms of the downtown population, and by the end of 18, we think we'll be at about 18,000. Not quite where we need to be, but again, significant progress moving forward. Going back to some of Richie's data, the taxable value of downtown apartment buildings increased 35% during that period, or about $84 million in value. The taxable value of our for-sale residents increased about 200% to $18.4 million. And remember, we're not a big condo market, which is one of our opportunities, I think, going forward. We have a lot of great work in the residential rental market, but how do we transition that into a for-sale process? Excuse me. We, for example, I think now have 880 condo units in downtown Cleveland. That hasn't really changed, I think, in about 4 years. And again, as we develop that housing base, we really need to see a significant improvement in that regard. Now, in terms of talent attraction, again, Richie's study indicates we have about 175,000 college students in the region. Again, we don't think of ourselves in that way, but let me repeat that number, 175,000 college students in this region. From 2000 to 2014, in downtown Cleveland, we had a 161% increase in college-educated residents. We had a 260% increase in households making at least $75,000 annually, and a 389% increase of households making $100,000 annually. Again, that type of growth in terms of that sector. For example, we've added about $100 million since 2011 in terms of the amount of disposable income for retail spending in downtown Cleveland. Now, that bodes well for companies that have made decisions like Heinen's, but we think it also bodes well for, again, as we grow that per capita income base and we grow the residential base in downtown, for additional retailers to make decisions to come down. What we also see is, again, over the last few years, working with our business development team and many of the people in this room in terms of the commercial brokerage community, we've seen about 5,000 new jobs added to downtown. And that trend, again, is very steady, but you're not seeing, massive 300,000 or 400,000 square feet of net absorption in downtown. What you're seeing is 100, 150, 65,000 in terms of net absorption. And to be honest, I think that's the pattern that's going to continue for the time being. But that doesn't mean that that's bad. If we retain the companies that are growing and doing well in downtown Cleveland, and we can, again, continue to attract companies that are looking for that talented individual that they have to attract, we think we can continue to grow the market very, very aggressively. And again, one of the key things from our perspective is in addition to connectivity, our public spaces. As David knows, we worked with he and his colleagues in the real estate community to create the 912 district a number of years ago. Who would have thought that now the media refers to that neighborhood not as the financial district, which it was known for years and years, but as now the 912 district. Why did we do that? We wanted to change the perception of the neighborhood and, again, introduce those mixed-use concepts that we talked about at the front end of this presentation. And by doing that, by bringing mixed-use opportunities to the table, by creating green space in Perk Plaza, we have galvanized the interest in that neighborhood, both from a residential perspective as well as an office attraction perspective. The Oswald Center, for example, the old Diamond Shamrock space, 1100 Superior, is a great example of a building that's been repurposed and has attracted jobs and is now a very stable and a very profitable, to be frank, for American Landmark company in their portfolio. 1717, which is transformed into housing. Suddenly, that nexus, and by the way, if you haven't been to Perk Plaza at about 9 o'clock at night, stop by sometime. The thing you'll see is not only people in the park, you'll see children in the park. Why? Because of the residential makeup of the adjoining neighborhood that's been created through additional residential improvements. And again, think now about Public Square. I did an op-ed piece in the Plain Dealer a few weeks ago talking about if we could do this with Perk Plaza, just think of what we could do with Public Square and how we can attract investment. And by the way, we already are attracting investment into the properties adjoining the square. And again, we think that that's going to be a great opportunity going forward. So from my perspective, our ability to continue the momentum that we've created in this mixed-use strategy is vitally important. Continuing to invest in walkability and green spaces is going to be important going forward. And again, I think, as I tell many people, in many ways, I think downtown Cleveland will be a little bit more like downtown Portland in the future and less like the Loop in Chicago in terms of the type of environment that we're creating, both for our office workers, our residents, as well as our visitors. And by the way, we didn't do a bad job this year with visitors, did we? Pretty good experience with the RNC, and I waited to the end of the conversation to talk about. But the fact that the RNC had such a great experience here, coupled with the parade and the night the Cavaliers won the NBA championship, all have, in many ways, changed the national perspective of Cleveland. And by the way, we're going to try to take advantage of that going forward. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. I think I have a few minutes. Anybody? Yes. Yeah, comparable weather, right. Well, if you step back, and I thank you for your question. The question was looking east of North Coast Harbor, and in particular the Burke Lakefront Airport. I get asked this question a lot when I speak, and the honest answer is Burke Lakefront is going to remain a reliever airport in this market for the foreseeable future. It unfortunately is part of our history. It's tied to the capacity at Hopkins Airport. If you know the aviation industry, you know that Hopkins is a very constricted footprint with an inability to create dual runway capacities that have enough distance between the two runways to allow it to operate in bad weather conditions. Now, that's another way of saying that because of that limitation, you need a general aviation and reliever airport to support Burke. To support Hopkins. People don't realize that there are about 65,000 takeoff and landings from Burke Airport every year. And the reality is if you closed it, the majority of those takeoff and landings would want to go to Hopkins. If you do that, the net result is the commercial airlines will have more expense at that location and will make it much more difficult to be frank, to keep carriers there on a long-term basis. So purely on an aviation perspective, it's a challenge. Now, having said that, can we better connect with bike lanes and some of the other things that would connect North Coast Harbor, for example, to Gordon Park to the east? The answer is yes. In fact, we are working closely with the campus district in St. Clair Superior to look at ways that we can create a green space that would allow people to take advantage of it, maybe not touch the water at that point. But remember, we have a significant amount of ability to touch the water currently, whether it's North Coast Harbor or the river. And if you think of all the activities and the recently announced Tiger Grant through the metro parks that will connect a number of public assets up and down the canal corridor as well as the river to Wendy Park, you will have the ability to, I think, touch the water in ways that historically maybe we've not, but developmentally we'll be able to create some additional opportunities. So I always want to be honest with you and say Burke isn't going to close. But I can tell you that I think we have enough capacity in terms of touching things, touching the water, if you will, to create the type of dynamic that we'd like to see both on the river and the Lake Erie side of the equation. Well, maybe I hear what you're saying, but maybe we could talk offline. There was a developer, I think about 40 years ago, proposed that, and it did not have a whole lot of traction, to be honest with you. It is very, very difficult to close and reopen an airport, to be perfectly honest. Yeah. Yeah, it was a land site, and as you know, right now there's a lot of debate between the Ohio EPA and the Corps of Engineers about dredging. The dredge materials. Back then, when the majority of Burke was created, there was no Ohio EPA. There was no national EPA. So what's underneath is a question, and whether or not the mortgage industry or the financial industry will ever take lien positions on that property, I don't know. But also, think about it. I don't want to divert our critical mass. I've got parking lots in the core of downtown that are ripe for development. We need to put in those picket fences. We need to fill those opportunities. By creating that type of vibrancy in the critical mass, we're able to create the type of environment we want. If we start diverting ourselves and saying, oh, geez, let's create a Crocker Park type of experience down at Burke, it may be very profitable for that developer, but I don't think it'd be profitable for us as a community. We have to, in essence, concentrate on the core, work with our adjoining neighborhoods, and make sure the development spreads in that direction, but make sure that we're doing the things in the core that we need to do to make it worthwhile. Any other questions? Yeah, the last one, sorry. The question is, what's the state of the downtown hotel industry? Now, the good answer there is we've added about 2,000 housing rooms in the last 2.5 years. That was the principal reason, and in fact, the Hilton was the principal reason that the RNC made a decision to come to town. We will go through some absorption issues with the 2,000 units coming online, to be perfectly honest. And I think the hoteliers recognize that, Destination Cleveland recognizes that. But there is a very robust interest in terms of bringing conventions to Cleveland. The RNC did open up new opportunities for us in terms of convention business. I think there was a great article by Mark Levy, the general manager of the convention center and the Plain Dealer a couple weeks ago. So we recognize that anytime you increase capacity by almost 40%, there will be a period of time where we absorb that. That's not unusual. I recall when we went through a last phase of absorption, when the Wyndham and some of the other hotels opened in downtown Cleveland, we went through a very similar period. The good news, though, is going forward, we now have 5,500 hotel rooms in downtown Cleveland. We've got a great, appropriately sized convention center that really the market is responding very positively to, and we have an opportunity to leverage what we've done with the RNC and the parade and all the other positive news of the city going forward. So I think we will be fine, and I think in time you're going to see more convention activity as a result of what we've been experiencing and the increased inventory. So with that, thank you so much. I greatly appreciate being with you today. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Marinucci. I'd now like to welcome Dr. Byron White, Vice President of University Engagement and Chief Diversity Officer here at Cleveland State, to speak about the impact that CSU has made not only on Cleveland, but Northeast Ohio as well. So please welcome Dr. Byron White.
Well, welcome to Cleveland State. I know you've been welcomed a few times, but I will add to that, those of you who are not here on our campus regularly. And also congratulations to the scholarship recipients who were announced earlier. I should just, by the way, in way of just transparency and advertising or straightforward advertising here, I am in no ways the real estate expert of this university. You will meet her very shortly. Stephanie McHenry, who is our Chief Financial Officer and Senior Vice President for Business and Financial Affairs, is more than equipped to answer those and to comment very specifically on the real estate dealings of the university. What I would like to share just very briefly, though, with you is a way of thinking about our role as a real estate developer and our comprehensive role in the region that we have adopted and have really elevated. And it really is, it's a model that President Berkman has called the Education Park model. So way of thinking about our role physically in this very critical location of the region and how that aligns with our overarching role as a university. And so I'll just give just a little bit about that way of thinking, that framework, and the impact that we believe it is having on the campus, on our students, faculty, staff, as well as the area around us and the region overall. The CSU mission promotes our role in excellence, diversity, and engaged learning. That phrase comes from our mission statement. And so our first obligation along those lines, obviously, is as an educator. We teach in the arts, the sciences, the humanities, the professions. We conduct research, scholarship, creative activity. And in doing so, we're preparing thousands of students, tens of thousands, over a 50-year period for lifelong success. As engaged residents, 80% of our graduates remain in Northeast Ohio. As skilled employees, as leaders overall. But as an institution, we realize our location in the heart of Cleveland, the heart of Northeast Ohio, means that we're far more than just that. As I mentioned, we're a real estate developer, we're a purchaser of local goods, we're an employer of some 1,500 full-time employees, a service provider, and increasingly a service provider. And many people don't know that we actually have a fully operating food pantry, for instance, on our campus now. And so in many ways, beyond an educating institution, we really are a community builder in all sorts of ways, and increasingly so. And we see that role as the role of an anchor institution. We're very fortunate, by the way, to be in a place where we're in close proximity to other anchor institutions. Joe mentioned downtown and its institutions and organizations, but as well, Cuyahoga Community College's Metro campus is less than a mile away. St. Vincent Charity Medical Center is right down the street. And there are certainly other institutions and organizations. Together, we sort of make up an anchor district that we call Campus District. And we're really pleased to be great partners with Downtown Cleveland Alliance in that respect. But President Berkman has embraced this dual role of educator and community builder through what he calls the education park model. And there are sort of three principles behind this idea of an education park. We're certainly doing a number of efforts physically, through physical development and otherwise, but in this education park thinking, there really are three underlying principles. The first is that those things we're doing as part of an education park leverage physical construction to enhance community and spur investment. So a very deliberate and conscious sense of development in that context of community. The second is to very purposefully galvanizing institutional partnerships and networks to achieve both high impact in an accelerated fashion. So this is not the university going it alone with grand ideas. These are all ideas where it is essential that we align with other institutions, organizations, across sectors in order to be successful. And finally, there's an intentional emphasis on innovation, innovative, accessible educational opportunity to all students in a way that ties to the regional workforce. And so all of these are efforts that also tie back to our education mission in a very innovative way. And so currently there are 5 components of the education park as we think about and as you witness what is happening around the campus. If you look to just across the street to the south, there is, I always get turned around when I'm here. There is the newest building on our campus, the Center for Innovation in Medical Professions building. It opened about a year ago. And it is also the home for all of our health professions programs, as well as there's space there for Northeast Ohio Medical University, NeoMed. Their Cleveland campus is housed there. So that is one component. If you look to the west, there is, of course, the Arts Campus, which allows our students from our Department of Theater and Dance, our Department of Art, to hone their skills in 3 renovated historic buildings on Playhouse Square. And so that partnership exists. If you turn just to the north, in Rhodes Tower, which is right behind us, there is the junior and senior classes of the MC Squared STEM High School, which is located in really one of the more iconic buildings on our campus. And further north, near Payne, there is the construction of the new Campus International School, which is another CMSD school. The K through 8 portion of that school will live in that new building starting next fall. And the high school, Cole Center will continue to house the high school as it emerges. And then just to the east is the expansion of our Washkowitz College of Engineering, which will open next fall as well, with spaces for design innovation in biomedicine, motion and control technology, new labs, and new opportunities. So these projects collectively, these 5, represent about $95 million in investment currently, and what will be upwards of $150 million when all aspects are completed. And they are catalysts and have shown to be catalysts for commercial and housing development in the area. And I know that all of you are witnesses to and participants in that work in multiple ways. Each one has also leveraged significant partnerships, public, private partnerships, philanthropic partnerships, nonprofit partnerships, CMSD, NeoMed, as I mentioned, Cleveland Playhouse, Cleveland Foundation, Parker Hannafin, Key Bank, other corporations. And so every one of them has a litany of these kinds of partnerships supporting them. And then finally, each one has advanced for the campus our capacity to effectively educate students and to educate them in new ways and to educate them for the emerging workforce. And that part often is not seen as you drive by and see a new building and maybe experience some of the other spin-off effects. But as a university, I can tell you that it is a core component of what the president and the Board of Trustees have insisted be a part of this education park philosophy. So for example, the new Center for Innovation in the Medical Professions building, as I mentioned, is home to interdisciplinary education that is really the cutting edge of the way the health professions will be performed going forward. And we are, through that program as an example, training students from urban Cleveland neighborhoods to be future doctors who are moving forward. The Arts Campus is exposing students to an interaction with world-class artists in world-class facilities that really is the envy, I can tell you, of many, many arts programs, not only in the region and the state, but around the country. MC Squared STEM provides a project-based instruction that has been lauded nationally on a number of fronts because high school students there who come from all backgrounds are able to interact with faculty in real university laboratories and explore and touch science fields in ways that just really isn't possible except for that kind of close proximity. Campus International, which is really the highest achieving elementary school in the CMSD system, is really fortunate to have some 30 faculty a year from across disciplines who interact with those elementary school students and dozens of our students as well. And then the advanced engineering solutions that are emerging from the expansion of our facilities there. The most exciting to me is the work in human motion technology, powering state-of-the-art prosthetic devices, meeting other challenges in healthcare and aerospace through that process. And so I just wanted to give you a little bit of a glimpse of what you see happening and the way that the university casts and sees itself in this very critical role as an anchor institution. And I can tell you that there is a tremendous amount of commitment and dedication to this dual responsibility, both in engaged learning for our students and to be a reliable and active anchor institution in downtown Cleveland. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. White. We have about a 10-minute break scheduled for us right now. The restrooms are located outside the doors to my left. We will begin the second half of our program with a panel discussion at exactly 3:10, led by David Browning after the break. Thank you.